Hello, Pop Tarts. This is going to be an episode of Deep Chats. I've only done one other episode of Deep Chats before because I meant to do more, and then I went off track completely, and the sound was naff for ages, and I couldn't convince myself to do more. And then one day I was like, if we don't get some other voices on this channel, it's just going to be me forever. And it's just looking like an exercise in pure narcissism now. So I thought, who would I like to talk to? Who would I like to get on? First person that came into my mind was Thorn Mooney, because I love Thorn Mooney's channel, have done for a very long time, and love the book that Thorn Mooney wrote. And so I thought, I have lots of burning questions for Thorn. So hello and welcome to this episode of Deep Chats, Thorn.
Hello, I'm really excited. I hope your questions are hard.
They're going to be tough.
Good, I'm glad.
In there. I've got some astrophysics stuff. I found it from the internet. I don't know the answers, but you'd better, otherwise you're screwed. Okay.
Well, as somebody who's into the metaphysics, I'm an expert on quantum physics, so that's fine.
That's excellent. No, that's good. Okay, well, because there's a lot of people out there saying they are, but I'm not sure. I can't check. So now we're gonna find out. We're gonna learn the real stuff. I'm actually more. I want to go into the book territory, obviously, because who wouldn't? If they were talking to you, they'd want to talk about this. Actually, there's going to be a few people that have seen my little video of when I came to London to see you when you did your at Atlantis Bookshop in the special room where the meetings took place before witchcraft was even legal.
That was
that was really cool. That was a good time. It was very surreal to see you in person, talking in person about the book that I was holding that I just bought from you. That was wild.
Sure. It's weird.
Yeah.
Forget that your online friends are real people.
Yes. Yeah. It's weird. It is very weird meeting somebody online in the flesh anyway. But I'd always known you'd write a book, but I never thought you'd be in London talking about it and I'd be there like geeking out over it. And then I'd go for a wee in the Crowley Crapper, which for anyone who hasn't seen that vlog, I'll leave it down below. Really, you should see it. It was good. It was a good time. How's everything been for you since then? You're writing more than one book now, aren't you?
I am. I have one more book under contract, and I have a third book that I anticipate being under contract shortly. And if it doesn't get a contract, I'll be writing it anyway. So one way or another, there's going to be at least 3 total. Yeah, book 2 is actually due at Llewellyn in mid-January. Don't tell my editor, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
What happens when that doesn't happen? Is there leeway? I mean, do editors give you something that isn't really up to the line because they know you might not do it?
So usually you pick your own date. You tell them when you're going to turn it in. And I can say this now because I also work in publishing now. Everybody's late. Everybody's late all the time. It's a miracle when authors are on time. We're terrible people. Editors know that we're terrible people, and when you email them and you're like, hey, this is going to be late, they're like, I know. Right. It's fine.
Okay, I think that would be a great comfort to a great many people who are either writing a book or thinking of writing a book. Of course, I try to be on time, but I always feel like editors probably have a thing where, they know it's like an industry, it's like an open secret. So they will not give you something that's too risky, too touch and go, because they assume you're okay. Oh, can you tell us anything about what these other 2 books are about?
I can. I'm really pumped. So the second book is I'm not in love with the working title right now. We'll see. But the working title is Next Level Witchcraft.
Oh, I love it.
It's about where to go when you're stuck. Whether your stuckness is because you're a beginner and you're overwhelmed, or your stuckness is because you've been doing this for 20 years and you've lost your groove, or you're experiencing burnout or whatever. It's about basically hitting a plateau and how to get off of it. So I'm really excited. And book number 3 is an intro book.
Okay.
And it's funny because I already know people are like, well, God, do we really need another intro book? But yeah, we do, because everybody's still recommending Scott Cunningham, and that was written decades ago. And chapter 1 is about how Wicca is shamanism.
We've moved on from that now.
Yeah.
We never
I love that book. It raised me up, but we need to stop recommending it because a lot of it is no longer applicable, and some of it is offensive now.
Yeah, yeah. It is of, I mean, it's of its time, and it's got that tone that it's just
Yeah.
not tone of now, and rightly so. Yeah, it's true. There are really old hat books still being recommended. So what do you think? Because there are intro books coming out. What do you think they're missing that people are still going back to Scott Cunningham?
Honestly, I think part of it is that people don't know how to find new books. And that sounds really counterintuitive because everybody has a book now and you can go online and you can buy a book from anybody. But most people don't actually do that. And I feel like I can say this both being a high school English teacher and now working in publishing, we're a lot less literate than we think we are.
Mm,
Um, and I see this, I'll give you an example. I've started hanging out on this app called Amino. Do you know what Amino is? Have you
Amino, yeah.
Yeah, so Amino really caters particularly to younger people. And I was actually doing a linguistics project for the graduate program I was in at the time. And I was looking at how people online talk about witchcraft and religion. So I found Amino and I was like, oh, this is great. I'll like, what are the young people up to? And nobody reads books. Like everybody wants articles, they want videos, they want Instagram like informative posts because those are a thing. People really aren't reading books, at least not in their entirety. And the books that they are reading are the books that are the most readily available. Um, and those are the ones that are largely easy to pirate. Which are Cunningham and Buckland and some of these others. So I think it's not that we don't have wonderful books available, it's that people aren't buying them and people aren't circulating them.
That makes me really sad. Like that actually, I mean, even though I'm always complaining that I don't have enough time to read, and my amount of books I've read per year in the last few years has been really unsatisfying because of reader's block, but also because I'm so busy. But
Yeah.
even so, it makes me sad, this idea that books aren't circulating, and that, that the idea that the publishing industry as well could suffer because the new
Yeah.
generation think of books that way.
And there are certainly outliers, right? I mean, like I think probably half of your viewers right now just went, well, that's not true. I read and I hang out on Amino. Like, of course, there are obviously exceptions, but when you're just kind of looking at the general public, this mass of people in the United States, um, I mean, this is true in education. When I was prepping to be a teacher, and this is true as I was preparing Seeker's Guide, the average reading level is like it's really low. It's like 8th grade or 7th grade or something like that. But they tell you to write at about an 8th grade level because that's where most people are. And
Okay.
I mean, my classrooms here in the States that was definitely the case. I taught 11th and 12th graders, and they're reading overwhelmingly at like an 8th or ninth grade level. And that's true for the general public now. Um,
Is this
so
because of the advent of social media and the rise of, like, being able to get your stuff in bite-sized chunks from blog posts and stuff like that? Or
I don't think it's because of social media. I think social media makes it easier for people to communicate when they do lack writing skills. So, and that's like, I'm a pro social media person for the most part. I think a lot of it has to do with just our failing education systems. I mean, I think that's the root cause. We don't value reading and writing. I mean, my mother actually texted me an article from the Washington Post last night about how, like, actually we do need people who major in English in college. And the premise of the article is we need storytellers. And my response to my mom was, that's sweet, but like, no, we need, like, there are literally words everywhere. Who do you think is writing them? It's not that we need English majors to entertain people. Like, who do you think is writing billboards and advertisements and contracts and, instructions on your drugs? And, like, you need to write. And we don't think about that stuff at all. We think of writing as this kind of whipped cream luxury discipline. Um,
yes, I think I might even do that. I think I do that.
I do too. And that's cultural and that's deep rooted, and we can't blame that on Instagram or Facebook.
No, I suppose not. It's been so long since I've been in school. I didn't even think about education as being a factor, to be honest.
Mm.
And I got out of school as soon as I could because I'm very different to you. I'm the antithesis of the academic, to be honest. But I value you very much and know I need you, but I just don't want to be you.
I think your methods are very academic. Like I think actually philosophically we're probably very similar. I think it's our methods that are different. You've got this kind of like rogue, like you prove that you can do it outside of a formalized system, which is true. People can. To be clear, like I'm an academic, but I'm also very like anti-academy a lot of the time. Like we're a bunch of elitist asshole white guys and women. Like we're just a bunch of like rich ass white people. And you know, like I left the program I was in for a reason. I didn't pursue PhD work for a reason, and like that reason is largely like rich ass white guys.
Yeah.
So
So you're
functioning outside.
Yeah, for sure. With the the question around what's popular, what books are popular, because you've said that there's new books coming out constantly now about witchcraft, and it's really it's having another renaissance, isn't it? It's like I feel like it happens once a decade. It might have missed a certain decade, but like it definitely came through in the 70s, very big time. I remember it in the 90s because I was there and the craft was everything. It just sort of like it comes around every so often.
Yeah.
You've said in your videos that there's some stuff that is taken from old books that have been previously published, and there are things that are historically inaccurate, probably the same complaints we had before about witchcraft books and stuff like that. Do you feel that, I remember you saying in your, what is it, Witchcraft as a Job video, that one thing you have to realize about publishing a book is that you have to market it, you have to get out there and talk about it and sing its praises and whatnot. Do you feel like a lot of what sells more is because of the way it's marketed or the way people present themselves? Like, how do you market a book and get people to buy it in the witchcraft world?
Yeah, I mean this is 100% true. I think a good person to look at, and I think we also have a tendency in our community to think that like if we name names, it means that we're bad people and we're putting them in the spotlight. But I think like as public people, we need to be open for criticism and conversation, right? Like, so I'm going to say like a really good example is Harmony Nice. Harmony Nice is lovely, okay, and I don't know her, but I've seen her videos and I've read her work. And when I read her book, hers was one of the ones that people were like, oh, you have to review this book because it's everywhere. And when I read the book, my biggest takeaway was, man, this feels really rushed. Like she could have said so much and her chapters are really short. This feels rushed to me. And I did some research because I try to read books without necessarily like picking apart the person first. Like I think the book needs to stand on its own. And she talks about like being approached by a publisher and having to do this really fast. Like I don't remember the timeline, but we're in this culture now where a publisher approaches you, asks you to basically fill this niche. Her publisher, I assume, saw, hey, look at all these young, hip women online who are interested in this thing. We need a book to sell them that's written by somebody who looks like them, which is great. I mean, I think that's that's what representation is. But the question there was not quality, which is not to necessarily say anything about the quality of that book in particular, but that's not what the publisher is interested in. The publisher is interested in getting the book in the hands of the money-bearing young people as soon as possible. I was contacted by a publishing house, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, and there's a term for it. I can't remember what the model is exactly, but basically they give you the outline of a book and they say, hey, we need you to fill in these blanks and make this book. The turnaround time is 6 weeks. We'll pay you a flat rate and we'll own the rights. Like you won't get royalties. And that's how a lot of these Instagram books are published. They're not approaching me because they love my writing style. They're approaching me because they think I fill a niche. And a lot of these younger kind of, they're not all young people. A lot of them are in their 30s, but the people who have this kind of aesthetic that we're talking about, they can sell that book. If you know that you can get a book into Urban Outfitters, then it doesn't necessarily matter what's inside. If you even look at the ratio of like images to text, some of these new books, like what are you actually buying?
I've noticed. Yeah. So would you say that if you were a person that wanted to write a witchy book, you had an idea for it, you should approach publishers or only accept offers from publishers that specifically publish metaphysical books about witchcraft, publishing houses that are known only for that, rather than, because I'm assuming, I don't know because I didn't read Harmony Nice's book, but I'm assuming it was published by a major publishing house that do books on all kinds of things.
Yeah,
Whereas
it was published.
I would always trust perhaps a publisher like Watkins, for example, who you know are working with that specific subject.
Yeah, well, and even like the occult and metaphysical publishers have particular reputations, right? Whether or not they're fair. For example, here in the States for a long, and I don't think this is necessarily true anymore because both of these companies have changed hands, okay? But in terms of like their acquisitions people, but in the 90s, Llewellyn was kind of like the love and light, like encouraging, kind of cheerful publisher, and Red Wheel Wiser was the more serious one. Right, like if your book was on Wiser, it meant that you were like a real occultist. Because Llewellyn only published people who would sell, like Silver Ravenwolf and Scott Cunningham. Like these were kind of the stereotypes. But some of our best-selling books as a community have been on major publishing house. I mean, like HarperCollins, I think, has published Starhawk. Like Phyllis Curott hasn't published with Llewellyn or Wiser, like she's published on other more mainstream houses. I think she's with Hay House now. So I think there are lots of ways to write a good book and get a good book published. I think the question is just remembering who you're writing for and why you're writing. People lose sight of that. And then like having some integrity about it. Because the reality too is that Harmony Nice isn't becoming a millionaire on her book. No, nobody is. None of us are. The best-selling witch writers are not making livings on their books. Maybe if they're making a living, it's maybe because they're doing other kinds of promotional work, or they've got some kind of witchy business where they're slinging cards, or they're making things. They're running stores. I think about Devin Hunter and Storm Fairy Wolf, who, aside from being best-selling authors, they also run a metaphysical store. They run traditions. They have a lot of other things bringing in income aside from book sales.
Yeah.
And people forget that. They think they're going to write a book, they're going to be a big-name pagan, they're going to be famous, and that's just not how it works. So you have are you writing because you want to make this movement more accessible and better, and you're trying to share what you know, or are you writing because you think you're going to be famous or something? And I'm not saying that ego isn't involved. Like, obviously my ego was involved in writing a book. I don't think you can help it, but
yeah,
whatever route you choose, like, do right by it, and do right by the movement.
And I've had to ask this question because some people will be delighted to hear this, because I literally have had my head bashed off a wall about this for about 4 years, but I am writing a book, writing a book as we speak. There's deadlines and everything. It's very serious.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so I feel like I have to ask this question. My mentality on it was, I already kind of knew from listening to you and listening to other people that know what they're talking about, and reading from people that have published books, that it doesn't work like that. It's not going to be something where you can immediately move into it and make a full-time living from it. So the way that I always thought of it was, it legitimizes and enhances whatever you've already got going on. So if you are a pro card slinger, or you do make videos, or you do other things, you run a store, having a book just sets a firmer foundation. It might gain you, I don't know, sort of a certain amount more prestige, or a certain amount more trust, depending on what you're selling or who your audience is. And I saw it more like that a book is worth writing not only because it's in you and you need to get it out of you and you feel like it's worth writing, but also, if anything, don't focus on the money, because that's not something to focus on in publishing. It's more like how it's going to enhance the other things that you have going on in your repertoire. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of paradox, because earlier I was telling you that literacy rates are declining, but at the same time, what you say is true. We tend to accept as legitimate somebody when they have a book. Like, you have to produce a thing. The quality of that thing we don't care so much about that. But if you've written a book, there's still this attitude that you're part of an elite class of experts. And like, I was talking to Kara, Cute Witch, who many of you viewers I think will also know about this, and she was saying something similar about how, because she gets asked too, like, when are you going to write a book? She's been on YouTube 100 years like us, and she was saying that, like, this she's sick of this attitude that, like, you don't know anything unless you have a book. Like, you could be reading professionally, you could be working as some kind of spiritual counselor, you could be a coven leader or a tradition leader for decades, and like nobody gives a shit if you haven't published a book. And that attitude, I think, is really harmful a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled that you're writing a book, because it is about time.
Mhm.
But people have really weird ideas about what publishing means. And most of the time, what publishing actually means is that, like, you have the privilege and the connections to write a book.
Mhm.
Like, that's what it
Yeah.
actually means. So,
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah, I think I've actually replied a few times with that, just to make sure that people are clear that I think that my body of work stands on its own and doesn't require a book. So, should anybody ever feel like it's about time because then it legitimizes what you've already done, I want to make clear that I feel like what I've done stands on its own. And if I was to die right now, I'd be perfectly happy with what I've put out there anyway. I wouldn't feel like, oh, damn, I wish I'd written a book before I got to this point of death. It's always about death with me. I can't help it. It always goes back to that. But I really wanted to make that clear, because it does I have been asked a lot, like, when is the book coming? And I always feel like it's probably best to think of it of, is there a book in you? Do you feel like there is a book in you, or are you more actually of a talker, or whatever the case may be? Do you feel like maybe the videos are where it's at for you? For me personally, my personal journey is that there is a lot of insecurity around writing a book. There's always been. My ego is very shy of writing a book. And that's something I've mentioned on the channel before, that for me, there is something about it, about the fact that I never went to uni, and I didn't take any kind of route to get where I am, aside from the route that I cobbled together for myself. And that even though I'm quite good at talking, I'm not 100%, I'm not comfortable with my ability with writing. So for me, this is a big ego test, and I'm glad because I think it's helping me to do shadow work as I'm writing it, and feel
yeah.
like I'm allowed to write this book. I'm allowed to write. Enough people want to listen to me talk. It's only one step aside from that. It's adjacent to that. So it's fine. So for me, it's been and I think it is for a lot of people, when they start writing a book, whether a publisher's approach them or whether they're just writing it off their own back and they're going to pitch it or whatever, there's a lot of feeling of, I'm allowed to write this book. I'm allowed to come into this and do it. And part of that is, like you said, because there's this idea that it's an elite club. But I think a lot of it, well, I think it is partly that, yeah, this idea that it's an elite club, and that if you're going to write a book, you must really think something of yourself and your ability to be able to write it. So it's talking to yourself, isn't it, about that?
Yeah. There's definitely an ego about it, because for me, the issue was, my book is about traditional Wicca. I'm a Gardnerian priestess, and like, we are a collective group of very strong-willed, autonomous people who don't like other people stepping up and representing us. And
Mm.
so for me, like, I knew that I could write. I've always loved writing. That was the thing that I was naturally good at when I was a kid. But do I have the right to write about my tradition? Like, what
Mm.
gives me the authority to write this book that's going to represent these traditions? Like, who the hell am I? So for me, that's what I was wrestling with. And in my writing, the way I get around that, the way I've kind of wrestled with that, is I really try to write directly from my personal experience, and I try to write about all the stuff I've messed up with, because I think people need that. Like, I've always, even on my blogs and in my videos, I really try to write about stuff when I'm wrong. Like, let me tell you about this time I was 15 and I thought I knew everything, and I set my bookcase on fire because I was putting a spell on somebody I shouldn't have. Let me tell you about the time I did this as a coven leader, and man, I thought that I knew everything, but I totally screwed up, and look at all these people I hurt, right? Like, I think you have to talk about those things,
Definitely.
because that's the only way that that pedestal that we put writers and speakers on comes down. Like, just because I wrote a book, that doesn't make me like the best Gardnerian or like the best witch or good at witchcraft even. It means that like I was good enough at stringing words together that somebody was like, oh yeah, this will sell. Like, that's all that means.
Yeah, but is your ego not a little bit inflated by the fact that you've got fucking Raymond Buckland on the front saying, hey, this is the, what did he say? This book is the quintessential guide for the true, sincere seeker. If I was you, I'd be like, yeah.
Since I think I can say this now because he's dead, but so the second part of that email,
wasn't so great.
The other thing that Ray Buckland said was, why didn't you recommend my blue book in it? Right? He wanted to know why Complete Book of Witchcraft wasn't in there. How the hell do you tell Ray Buckland that you didn't recommend his book because you didn't think it aged well? Like, how do you do that? But he died before I had to.
That is the most amazing thing.
So,
I can't believe that.
I didn't have to answer that question because he died. Like,
that's one way to say that book is a little bit of a dry lunch these days, Ray. And suddenly he was gone, and you were like, "Oh, thank God! I don't want to have to say that."
Right, because like not only is this guy like, you know, a living monument of witchcraft, but he's also in my upline, right? Like in my tradition. So it's like telling your grandpa, right, that he can't do. I don't know, just.
Yeah, it would feel wrong, but because it's the truth, but you don't even want it to be the truth.
Right. So yeah, no, definitely. Like when I got that blurb, because I didn't even want to ask. Like, I wasn't going to ask Ray Buckland. I asked several people, and I was really anxious about asking anybody because I mean, you saw me. I was like screaming over you in Atlantis. I lose my mind. Oh, I'm such a fangirl. Even people who like I've met Christopher Penczak like a half dozen times, and I'm still like, oh my God, Christopher Penczak knows I'm alive, right? Like I one time Silver Ravenwolf commented on a blog, and I literally just like hit caps lock and mashed the keyboard, and that was my response to her. So like, I'm a big fangirl, so I wasn't gonna ask Ray Buckland, and my editor was like, you need to ask Ray Buckland. Like, we don't care about your feelings. And I was like, no, I can't do it. And she did it for me. She was like, here you go. By the way, like, and when I got it, yeah, like that was a huge ego boost. So I don't know. And people have said creepy things to me, right? Like, you know, well, this book, because the book came out, Buckland died right before the book was released. And I had somebody who was like, wow, it's like the torch has been passed to you. And I was like, that's disgusting. Don't say that. But yeah, so that by itself was a complicated experience. Like this one very brief interaction I had with Ray Buckland where he was like, yeah, I like the book. Why isn't mine in it? Explain yourself, young person.
I can never imagine asking that, but I mean, it is the big blue book, I guess. But yeah, I don't know if I would have been able to ask that, but I'm glad that you got that. And when I got the book and I saw Raymond Buckland on the front of it, I was like, well, this is a big like tick. This is a big yes. This is, I mean, I would let myself be happy about that. That's incredible. Then I turned the page and I was like, Deborah Lipp's in here saying, yes, read this. I was like, what?
Like, I'm so scared of Deborah Lipp. Like, she's so smart and like her books are so good, and like I'm terrified of her, and I think she's awesome. And so when Deborah Lipp was like, yeah, this is good, I was like, oh my God, I can die now. So yeah, ego is totally wrapped up in all of it. But I think you still, and like this is why people do shadow work, right? Like you still have to know yourself well enough to know where that's coming from and like take it down a notch when you need to.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I think that too. You do really good reviews. I love the reviews of books that you do on Instagram, where you've got a format that you follow, where you're like basically, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What I would have changed, what I loved about it, and I think that's a really good way to review. What's it like having your book out there and knowing that people can review you? And have you seen any crap reviews? I doubt you have. And yeah, what's it like reviewing other people's, knowing you are going to write more books as well?
It feels like I feel like I have permission to write book reviews and to be critical in public, because you can always, like, you can do the same for me, and I really invite that open discourse. I was thinking about this the other day, and this is why I started writing these book reviews the way that I do, because if you just look on YouTube, and if you look on Pathos, and if you look in magazines, if you read in Witches and Pagans magazine, there's like a back few pages where there's book reviews, and anyway, everybody just loves everything all the time. Like, and it's because nobody will write reviews at all if they didn't love the book. Like, if you ask somebody to review your book and they didn't, it's either because they didn't read it or because they didn't like it and they didn't want to write a negative review. That's the culture we live in right now. So what ends up happening is you can look up any book and there's like a dozen positive glowing reviews. And it means that we don't actually know what we're getting. Like, nobody wants to talk about the bad stuff because nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings. And while that's admirable, like, we're talking about literature. We're not talking about like people's moral worth. Like, just because I didn't like your book doesn't mean I don't think you're like a morally valuable person worthy of respect. And when people are criticizing my book, like, that's fair game, and they should be criticizing the book, because the book isn't perfect. Nobody's book is. The only reviews that I really that get under my skin, insofar as any of them ever do, are the ones where it's clear the person didn't really read it, or it's clear that the reason they don't like the book is because they resent that it's about what it's about, right? Like, I've seen several reviews that are like, I hate this book because it's all about being in a coven, and doesn't she know that most people are solitary? And I'm just like, yeah, there's 8 billion books about how to be a solitary. Here's one about how to be in a traditional coven. Like, people don't like that, right? Because, well, I'm solitary. Well, cool. It's literally on the back of the book what this book is about.
Yeah. Yeah, that would annoy the hell out of me, actually. I would get really riled by that, because you know going into it what it is. Don't ask me to make it into something I never said it was in the first place.
Right? Like, well, I can't believe you wrote this book about, lions. I love tigers, right? Like, why don't you talk about tigers? Well, it's a book about lions. Sorry. Go over
You know
there
what?
yourself
I
with a
actually,
book about tigers.
it is. I think people don't think about that. They don't think about how they come across when they're saying that kind of thing, and they've not thought it through. It does bring me to something though that I really did want to ask you about, the whole thing about writing a book where you're talking about a coven, you're talking about how to find a coven, and you said in a couple of videos, I do watch them all, you said in a couple of your videos that if you want to really get it advanced, because people often ask you about advanced books, how do we go advanced? And I know that you've raked over the coals several times of the discussion about how you have to go from being general to specializing, and there aren't really advanced witchcraft books, because advanced witchcraft is about specializing in Kabbalah or specializing in whatever. And I wondered, when you've said that if you really want to go advanced, you have to join a coven, there's stuff in there that you can't find on the bookshelves. There's like, joint books in there full of stuff and people telling you stuff you've never heard of before. Would you say that it's probably the same for eclectic and solitary witches? Do you think it's a shame there's so many solitaries? Do you think they're not getting the benefit of that joint hive mind history?
So this is tricky. When I say that, if you really want to take things a step further, you need to look at coven work. I'm really talking about Wicca. When people claim to be experts on Wicca and they've never been involved in a traditional coven, they are simply incorrect.
Oh, wow.
Like, whether or not you stay in one, whether or not you like it, because you don't have to like it. But if you don't have that background and you purport to know everything about the thing, like this happens to me as a Wiccan all the time, because Wicca isn't cool right now, right? Like traditional witchcraft is cool. Well, like we're pulling from the same texts and we're using a lot of the same languages. But my thing isn't hip anymore, which is fine. Okay, it's actually sort of a relief. But one of the reasons people cite this is that, oh, well, we already know everything about Wicca. Like that's over and done with. It's shallow. We're moving on. Well, yeah, if all you're reading is Scott Cunningham and like Ray Buckland's bestsellers and watching Harmony Nice videos, and you're like, hey, Wicca is shallow, I'm going to go do something else. You're right. That version of Wicca is shallow because the rest of it isn't for public consumption. It's a mystery cult, you know? Like, I don't know. It's like,
that makes it sound so badass. It's a mystery cult. It's like, my curiosity's peaked already.
yeah, it's a mystery cult. And it's not for everybody. I'm not saying like you need to do this. You can know offhand that it's not for you without getting involved. But like if you read the canon of Scott Cunningham and you hang out on YouTube and Instagram and you think that that's going to give you everything about Wicca, like you're just wrong. Sorry. And that's what I mean when I say like you have to look at coven work. Now I don't know that I don't think that that's true for other kinds of witchcraft. But for Wicca it is. And as far as like the solitary experience, because people forget this too, right? Like the majority of my witch life has not been in a coven. You know, I was a 90s teen witch like everybody else. And I've had that experience. And most of my practice still is solitary because even a witch who's in a coven, well, what are you doing when you're home? Because you're not with your coven the majority of the time, or even like most of the. I mean, I see my coven like once a month, twice a month. What am I doing for the rest of the month? I'm by myself practicing witchcraft. I think the thing that makes me a little bit sad for other people is when they look at something like a chat room or like YouTube community drama or a pagan festival like an open ritual, and they go, oh man, like I hate working with other people. I could never be in a coven. I'm going to be solitary. None of those things are even remotely like being in a coven, right? They're very different experience. Like I hate open pagan communities too. I find them exhausting. I don't hang out in chat rooms. I'm one of the few people running around who like genuinely is not on Facebook. Okay. But coven experience isn't like that. So just because you hate open rituals or just because you think, oh, I don't like drama, I could never be in a coven. That's not a reason to not be in a coven because that's not how covens operate. Right. Saying like, yeah, like, oh, I could never deal with drama and I could never deal with people. So like, I'm never gonna have a family or have friends. That's what that sounds like to me. Like it's just, those are very different experiences. Just because you can't handle online pagan communities doesn't mean you can't handle like an intimate mystery cult.
Yeah. And isn't there also this fundamental misunderstanding as well? Because like in a coven, you're in the outer court, is it how you call it first? And so there's a way to bring somebody in to higher learning in the inner sanctum, isn't there? It's not just like anybody can walk in and say, I want to join this coven, is there space? And then this person joins and it's a complete shit show. Everything is vetted, isn't it, would you say?
Yeah. And people will call us elite. Think of it more like dating, right? Like me choosing like who my partners are going to be isn't because I'm an elitist. It's because like I have bodily autonomy and I have autonomy over my emotions, and like I get to make a choice about who's in my inner circle, and what I do with those people. I don't have to take all comers just because we expect people to be nice. Like that would be a bizarre thing to expect of somebody who was dating or looking for a relationship. But we expect it of coven leaders. We expect coven leaders to take everybody. And it's because we're all still kind of Protestants, right? Like we think of coven leaders as basically like ministers, and ministers are supposed to minister to everybody and love everybody. That's what we think clergy does. That's what we think religious people do. But that's not how witches operate and coven leaders operate. I think it's kind of a mistake, honestly, when witches and Wiccans refer to themselves as clergy, just because people have associations with what that means. And clergy are supposed to take everybody in and minister to everybody, and that is not what a coven leader does.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I get to turn people away, and I'm not just doing it because I'm a jerk. I'm doing it because I understand magical dynamics, and not everybody gets to play with me. You know, that's one of the beautiful things about having so many different covens within one tradition is priests and priestesses have different personalities. They jive with different people. Somebody who is very successful in another coven might hit a wall with me, and vice versa. I don't think I would have made it as a Gardnerian if I wasn't in the group I was in at the time. I mean, I was pretty willful and had a lot of stuff to work through. So it really depends. You have to have that match. It's chemistry. But people think it's just elitism.
Yeah, I would say you have to have that match and that chemistry, because to me, I think ritual and magic are some of the most intimate and personal and deep things that I do. So, you know, to me, one of the many reasons I would say it's not for me, and I have definitely shit talked it in the past based on like human dynamics are complicated and I don't want to let them near the most important thing in my life, which is one of those things.
Totally fair.
I have shit talked it, and I've shit talked it not knowing what it's really actually like, and assuming it's probably always going to go south, which is outrageous now at the age of 34, because I know so many people who have been so enriched by coven work. You know, but to me, doing the idea of doing a ritual in front of other people and with other people with the same goal in mind is like, honestly, it's like, I don't know, what would it be like doing in front of them? Self-pleasuring in front of them. It's that deep. It's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, and I think being a solitary is a wonderful choice, and I definitely think that it is something that all of us need to cultivate, whether or not we're in groups. Because ultimately, like, even the best coven is going to end at some point. Like, it's like marriage, right? At some point, one of you is going to die. Okay? Like, all relationships come to an end. And you're going to be alone at the end of that. So, like, who are you when you're by yourself? If your coven dismantles or you move or somebody dies, are you going to stop being a witch? I hope not. So that has to be in place. And some people, like you said, like, just because somebody isn't in a coven doesn't mean that they haven't, like, self-examined or made a decision about, like, who they are and what they can do. Because some people don't want to share those parts of themselves, and that's fine. But also, like, a lot of covens do suck. Like, maybe most of them, just because of kind of what you're saying with like human dynamics and ego and whatever. All that stuff is still a factor, which is why I wrote the second half of that book about like how to navigate crappy situations. I've been in crappy coven situations. It's like dating. You know, I think that analogy works really well. Like, you have to go on some really terrible dates sometimes to find somebody that you really like. And just because you like somebody at the offset doesn't mean that you're going to like them in 10 years or that they're being totally honest or, you know. So anytime you're dealing with people, you have to be on your guard.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Would you say that earlier you said, you know, Wicca's not cool right now? Wicca's not the thing people are really kind of, you know, generating loads of books about and writing loads of posts about. With the current sort of craze and popularity around witchcraft, would you say that Wicca's actually dodging a bullet and it's actually quite good that it's not the cool thing right now?
I don't know. My working partner and I have conversations about this because he worries about what this is going to mean for our tradition in 50 years. You know, if we're not bringing in, you know, quality people or the people that we want, or we're not in, like, to some extent, right? Like, Gerald Gardner was really invested in getting witchcraft out there, partially because he believed in reincarnation and he wanted to make sure he was reborn in a witch family. And the only way to do that was to make sure that there were as many witches running around as possible, so he could be reborn to one of them. And I think that's very sound reasoning.
Very sound reason, absolutely.
But I'm very esoteric about this. Like, I'm very, like, this is my magical thinking at play. I believe that the people who are supposed to find their way to what we're doing will find their way. And, like, I wrote a book so that maybe it's a little bit easier for some of them, but I think they'll get there one way or the other. So I don't know that I think Wicca will be fine. And it's like anything else. I have to remind myself of this because I totally turn into this curmudgeon-y old man where I'm like, all these kids get off my lawn, like, you know, they don't even know what they're talking about, and they're shallow and they're not going to stick to it. And they said the same thing about us when we were reading Teen Witch in 1998, right?
Mm.
When I was crazy over the craft and I bought my first pentagram at like Spencer's Gifts or whatever at the mall, they said the exact same stuff about us. And it wasn't true. So
And look
who
at you now.
well, who am I to say that somebody who like is getting made fun of for being like, oh, you're only into the aesthetics and, you know, you and your like blackcraft cult, whatever, like version of witchcraft. Who am I to say that that person isn't serious?
I love them.
So I try to be mindful. That's one of the reasons why I think journaling is so important, because I can look back at my teen books and be like, man, how am I different from them? You know?
Yeah. I love that. I love that you haven't adopted the Miss Trunchbull perspective of like horrid little things, children. Glad I never was one. You're more
Yeah.
like, I was there. I was there. I bought the pentagram from Spencer's. All right, it's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and we love to shit on young women too, right? Like things that teenage girls are into, we hate. And like I really want to disabuse people of the notion that if young women are interested in it, it must be because it's shallow or insubstantial or not real, and none of that stuff is true. One of the things I said in my Harmony Nice video was that, man, you know, I really hope that she continues to produce content and writes another book and takes her time, because she has the reins of this movement, whether she wanted them or not. Because she tells you throughout the book, I've been doing this for like 4 years, guys. Like, I'm not an expert. She tells you these things. But we have a tendency to look again at like people with lots of subscribers, people who've written books, as experts. And like, where's she going to be in 20 years? Because it could be someplace really unexpected and cool. You know, it's good for any of us, I hope.
Yeah,
So,
and I like that idea as well from my own perspective, because I would always like to think that if, I mean, my first book will be what it is, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but it is what it is. But there's so much other stuff I want to cover that doesn't come under this umbrella, and there's so many things I want to write about that you'd only really vibe with if you've been practicing for at least 10 years. So I want to do another book isn't it weird how when you're writing one book, the stuff that isn't relevant to that book makes the notes of the new book appear. You're like, but that's for the next one, that's the next one. I didn't think that would happen to me, but it totally has. And I like the idea that whatever doesn't rise in the oven with the first book, because it's my first attempt, I've never done anything like this before, whatever doesn't rise in the oven, it's fine. There's plenty more time and more energy for other books, and some books will be better than others. And I like that idea that we don't have to put it all in one thing and cook it very quickly and get it birthed. And I think it's evident from Harmony's sort of take on witchcraft that she has been doing Wicca for 4 years, and she will continue to do it for another 4 more. It's evidently her religion. So I feel like probably after the witchcraft phase, because let's face it, it's like on a peak now as it was before. I've remembered a couple of times before when I've been like, wow, it's like everyone's becoming a witch now. It will go down, and then after that she'll have the option to keep making thoughtful content and keep growing on her path and write a book that maybe has had the time taken where she can really like settle into it and write what she wants to write. And that's what I'd hope for everybody that's published a book on this wave. And I'm going to publish my book on this wave. This wave is the reason the publisher came to me, so I'm on the same wave. But I'd like to see the people that are really invested in it do it long after everybody's moved on to something else, because there'll be something else in a minute.
Yeah, and I think that's why the issue of integrity is so important, where you can't write the book because you just want to be famous and it's going to be a bestseller and you're not going to have to work your crappy office job anymore. You have to write the book that is meaningful to you and is as true as you know it to be in the moment. I think that's where longevity comes from. I hope it does. This is what I tell myself, because as a writer, and I think you'll understand this as a content creator and now as an author, it's really difficult to watch other people around you writing more, faster, and selling more. It's difficult. Like, it's hard not to feel envy. I think it's natural. It's human. And it's part of it is like, I knew going into this that I was only going to write about specific things. I was approached by a publisher, I told you a few months ago, and they wanted a spell book. And I was like, I can't write a spell book. My audience doesn't want a spell book from me. Like, that's not my niche. It's not what I do. Like, I think it would be phony for me, which is not to say that, like, it isn't perfect and wonderful from other people. I mean, if I were to write a book imagine if I was to put out a book about traditional witchcraft just because it's trendier than Wicca, right? Like, that would be ridiculous. That's not who I am.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I have to write about traditional Wicca because that's what I do. That's, like, to me, that's my will and my calling. And I think whatever your will is, like, that's what you have to pursue. And maybe you don't experience the runaway success that you think you deserve right from the get-go. But is your book still in print in 40 years? Because that's my goal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'll keep the office job. That's fine. But I want my book to be in print decades from now. It's okay if it's never a bestseller. It's okay if, like, I make $1,000 on it maybe every year or two. Like, that's okay. Is it still in print doing its job? Because a runaway bestseller that's available look at the trendy books that were being published about how to be a witch in the 70s. Most of them aren't in print anymore. Those pulp paperbacks. Are those Urban Outfitter books going to be in print in 10 years? No, like, they're not. There will be new ones to replace them. I want my book to be in print. So
that's a really good goal. That is a really good goal. That's something that's made me think very differently about what I want for my book and what people perhaps should want in general for something they write about that really is truly their passion and that it really means a lot to them. It's a really good point. Darling, I've kept you a terribly long time.
No, I love talking to you anytime.
Yeah, I could go on all day. I've absolutely loved this. I think this is, and I do you know what? I'm just in love with that story about Buckland. I'm so happy that that's actually in this. I can't wait for other people to hear it. That's really awesome. Well done so much on your book. It's insanely good. I love it. It's brilliant. I was reading it the next day in the hotel before I left, and I was like, what the hell? This is so good. It's wicked, and I can't wait to see what else you do. And I'm going to link down below to your YouTube channel and your website, so everybody can go and find you if they don't know who you are already, which I should assume is impossible. But in case there's any stragglers, this is Thorn Mooney, aka Drawing Canars, and if you go that far back. And yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Killian. I really appreciate it.